There's three things that we want to learn. The first one is how Vietnam got to be such a high-performing country in terms of education, looking at the time period from about 1990 to 2015. As people may know, Vietnam did very well on these PISA sort of evaluations that were done in 65 countries in the year 2012. And since then, there's been big interest in do that. So we have got data from many different sources going back to the early 1990s and up to 2015 that we can use to try to understand why Vietnam seems to be performing so well. In fact, the first thing we're going to check is whether it really is such a good performer, because if you ask anyone in Vietnam about the PISA scores, they say they don't believe it, that they're that good. But we have other evidence that seems to work, that show that it is really pretty good. The second thing we're going to look at is that Vietnam has actually adopted a program that was started in Colombia in the 1970s called Escuela Nueva, which is designed to get kids to sort of think creatively and to sort of organize themselves to learn and develop critical thinking skills. So Vietnam has adopted that in selected schools, actually about 10% of primary schools in 2014. And so we're going to evaluate how effective that is. Actually, the World Bank is already doing an evaluation for 2 years, but we're going to extend it for 5 more years to follow these kids as they get older, but also to look at its adoption in lower secondary schools. Okay? And then the third thing is there's a planned curriculum reform in Vietnam in 2018. The details of this haven't been worked out yet, so we don't know exactly what it's going to be. But again, there's the idea in Vietnam that the curriculum is out of date. The kids maybe are good at doing math problems and reading, but when they get jobs, the employers complain that they don't have the right skills and things like this. So this big curriculum reform, and we're going to evaluate what's the effect of that on various kinds of skills, both what you might call cognitive skills and also what people call non-cognitive skills or socio-emotional skills. So, why is this of interest to Vietnam? Well, I guess for the first one, we just want to show them, hopefully, that really they are maybe as good as all these tests say that they are, but also give them an idea like how they got that way. I think they'd find that very interesting. For the other two things, they certainly would like to know whether Escuela Nueva works really well or not. I actually was in Vietnam for the past 2 weeks, and I talked to somebody I know, and he doesn't like that at all. When I talked about it, he's not really an education person, he's more a statistics person, but he knew all about it. He said he doesn't like it at all. So to see whether, there's probably other people in Vietnam who think the same way. So we'll see whether or not, how well effective it is in Vietnam. And then the curriculum reform, they definitely would like to know how well that works. So I think the government is very much interested, not just the Ministry of Education, but the entire National Assembly and other ministers want to know how effective the curriculum reform is going to be. For the first sort of thing that we're going to do, which is explain why Vietnam seems to be a top performer, we're going to use some data that come from several countries, of which Vietnam is only one, and we're going to see whether or not sort of what seems to explain things in Vietnam also seems to explain in other countries. I mean, to take a really simple example, Vietnamese parents are relatively high educated, and we can see what's the effect within Vietnam of parent education, and then we can see in other countries, do we see the same effect or not? And there are many other things we can look at as well. If we see they seem to have the same effect in these data sets that are the same across multiple countries, then that could have implications for what other countries should be doing. How can they get to where Vietnam is? The second one, the Escuela Nueva program, Latin America is very different from Vietnam in many ways. So if this program that has been tried in several other countries seems to be successful in Vietnam, well, those being two very different countries, probably there's a good chance that it could be effective in other countries as well. So I think that could be useful. And then finally, the curriculum reform, it's hard to say right now how relevant it's going to be to other countries because it hasn't been worked out in detail, but to the extent, after it does get worked out and we evaluate, if we find that it's really effective, then hopefully at least some aspects of that will be applicable to other countries. Because just like in Vietnam, I was saying that employers complain that the people they hire don't have the right skills. Well, other employers in other countries have the same complaints, even in the US and the UK and many other developed countries.